faithfully delivering value, interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Book Talks. Today, the book we're discussing is called The Story of Blood Transfusion. Subtitle, Medicine and Murder in the Scientific Revolution. Blood transfusion, this medical procedure, is very familiar to all of us. Since the early 20th century, transfusion technology has been widely used in medicine, saving lives every day. The transfusion story in this book takes us back to 17th century Europe. At that time, human blood transfusion had already become the focus of medical research. From 1665 to 1669, scientists in England and France raced to conduct human transfusion research. This competition wasn't just about science, but also about the rivalry between the two nations. But just as the competition intensified, a mysterious murder case brought it all to an abrupt end. For 150 years afterward, no one in England or France conducted human transfusion experiments. Thus, early transfusion research was cut short midway. The author Holly Tucker is a professor at Vanderbilt University's Center for Medicine, Health, and Society, and also a science historian. In this book, Tucker reconstructs the scientific history intertwined with medicine and murder, telling us a story of scientific ambition and royal power. Before diving into the story, let's understand the background of the 1660s transfusion experiments in Europe, which relates to the then raging scientific revolution. In 1543, Copernicus published On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres. By replacing geocentrism with heliocentrism, it pioneered the scientific revolution in astronomy, basing on facts, dispelling misconceptions, and seeking objective truth were this revolution's core principles. Following astronomy, a scientific revolution also unfolded in medicine, centered on re-understanding blood. Before the 17th century, European doctors generally adhered to the medical system established by Galen. Galen, a renowned physician of ancient Rome, believed blood originated in the digestive tract as a product of cooked food. Blood gathered from the digestive tract to the liver, filtered through it, flowed to the heart, and was propelled to body parts where it burned and absorbed, gradually vanishing at the extremities. Based on this theory, Galen concluded many diseases resulted from excessive blood putrefying at body extremities due to failed absorption. Therefore, he proposed bloodletting, which involves cutting open human blood vessels to drain excess putrefied blood. Bloodletting was widely used in Europe for over 1,000 years. A medieval doctor wrote that bloodletting could clear the mind, enhance memory, cleanse the stomach, improve the voice, chase away anxiety, expel toxins, and even prolong life. In short, bloodletting was thought to cure all diseases, but we know today that's impossible. People back then actually discovered that bloodletting often didn't cure diseases, but could even kill people. So, where did the problem lie? In 1628, a British doctor named William Harvey revealed the answer. Harvey is hailed as the father of modern physiology and a milestone figure in medical history. In our previous Sally Book Talks, we covered a book called The Strange Life of Human Corpses. It also mentioned that Harvey dissected family members' bodies for medical research. In 1628, Harvey published the book On the Motion of the Heart and Blood, pointing out that blood doesn't flow one way, but circulates in the body. Therefore, blood has a fixed amount in the human body, and there's no issue of excess blood pooling at the extremities. Harvey's blood circulation theory completely overturned Galen's bloodletting. Then, people raised a new question. If bloodletting is useless, could injecting healthy blood, that is, transfusion, cure diseases? In response, the British took the lead in research, kicking off transfusion experiments. In the 1650s, two British doctors, Wren and Clark, guessed that injecting liquids into human blood vessels would have the same effect as drinking them. So, they injected water, milk, beer, and broth into animals' blood vessels and even used a prisoner about to be executed for human experimentation. However, after Wren and Clark injected a small emetic into the prisoner's blood vessel, he immediately fainted. Although Wren and Clark couldn't tell if the prisoner fainted from fright or the drug, they felt they shouldn't try such dangerous experiments again.
But this result didn't scare off others.
Another British doctor, Richard Lower, wondered if a dog could survive without eating meat, but by having nutrients injected into its blood vessels. So he injected milk into a dog's blood vessel, and the dog died quickly. Lower dissected the dog's body and found that the dog's blood and milk had clotted together. In his view, the dog's death was because milk and blood, two different substances, couldn't combine well. And he guessed that if it were blood mixing with blood, this problem wouldn't exist. So in January 1665, Lower conducted the first ever blood transfusion experiment in London, England. The subjects were two dogs. Lower fixed their necks close together on the operating table, cut the donor dog's carotid artery and the recipient dog's jugular vein, connected them with a goose quill tube. Relying on the donor's arterial pressure, blood was transfused. Ultimately, the donor dog died from massive blood loss. But when the experiment ended, the recipient dog immediately jumped up from the table, wagging its tail and running off, as if nothing happened. Thus, Lower believed blood transfusion was feasible and worth further research. However, Lower's subsequent experiments were forced to pause due to successive disasters. First, in spring 1665, the plague struck London, causing 100,000 deaths. At the start of the next year, just after the epidemic passed, Britain went to war with the Netherlands and was defeated. Afterward, London encountered an unprecedented Great Fire, burning down numerous buildings. But news of Lower's experiment reached Robert Boyle, a famous 17th century British scientist. He made significant achievements in fields like physics and chemistry, and was a founder and main leader of the Royal Society. The Royal Society was founded in 1660, the world's first national-level scientific research body, gathering Britain's scientific elites. Boyle wrote an enthusiastic letter to Lower, persuading him to share experiment details. Lower responded enthusiastically, advising Boyle not to use weak dogs as donors because their heartbeats were too weak and fast. Instead, large dogs should transfuse blood to small dogs. The Great Fire of London. Just after November 1666, Boyle organized people to repeat Lower's experiment in the Royal Society's meeting room in London. Meanwhile, at Oxford University, the experiment was repeated under Lower's guidance. The results matched Lower's earlier ones. Although donor dogs with cut carotid arteries died quickly from blood loss, the recipient dogs all survived, lively and active. The British believed that the reproducibility of experimental results proved success, which thrilled many in Britain. Henry Oldenburg, secretary of the Royal Society and editor of its official journal, Philosophical Transactions, published this news and detailed the entire animal transfusion experiment process. To the British, achieving the world's first successful transfusion experiment not only marked Britain's medical leadership, but also provided a morale boost to a nation ravaged by plague, war, and fire. To summarize, from 1665 to 1666, the British conducted animal experiments, marking the beginning of transfusion research. However, the British never expected the French to steal their spotlight so quickly. Through human transfusion experiments, the French escalated this competition to its peak. In 1667, news of British transfusion experiments reached France. Unlike disaster-stricken Britain, France was experiencing rapid development then, with Paris flourishing. King Louis XIV of France understood that scientific advancement was a crucial symbol of national strength. In 1665, he established the French Academy of Sciences, gathering numerous scientists, including leading physicians, from Paris Medical School. Paris Medical School was France's top medical institution, but most doctors there were conservative. Many still adhered to Galen's bloodletting therapy, and dismissed British transfusion experiments.
But not to be outdone by the British, the French Academy immediately repeated dog transfusion experiments. The lead researcher was Claude Perrault, a Paris Medical School graduate who refined equipment using delicate metal tubes as transfusion conduits.
However, according to Perrault's published results, both transfusion dogs died. Perrault thus declared that blood from one organism couldn't nourish another. Moreover, transfusion between organisms could be fatal, so the British were wrong. So why did Perrault's results differ from the British? Why did the recipient dog die in the experiment? Perrault dissected the dead recipient dog and found clotted blood masses in its heart. Modern medicine calls this blood clotting phenomenon a transfusion reaction that occurs when incompatible blood types are introduced. Mild reactions include allergies, fever, etc., which aren't life-threatening, but clotting is extremely serious. This transfusion reaction killed the dog. As we know, humans have 4 basic blood types: A, B, AB, and O. But dogs' blood types are even more complex, with up to 12, making clotting and other transfusion reactions more likely. Later analysis suggests that, in British experiments, recipient dogs survived likely because the leaky goose-quill tubes used meant less blood entered, preventing severe clotting. But Perrault's switch to sealed metal tubes allowed large volumes of blood in, causing the dogs' deaths. But back then they didn't know about blood types. In fact, Perrault did have cases where recipient dogs survived transfusions in repeated experiments. However, convinced transfusion was flawed, he blamed faulty equipment, thinking no blood entered, for those survivors. While Perrault experimented within the French Academy walls, a young Frenchman named Jean-Baptiste Denis caused an uproar.
Denis, from a common background, had just earned his doctorate from Montpellier Medical School in southern France when British transfusion news arrived. He came to Paris, hoping to break into its scientific circles and ascend socially.
Montpellier trained nearly 40% of France's doctors then, second only to Paris Medical School. But Montpellier favored unconventional research, and its students were free-spirited party lovers. Thus, in conservative Paris, they had a poor reputation, making Denis' dream extremely challenging.
But transfusion gave him a chance. Denis performed many dog experiments, drawing crowds by doing them publicly on his dining table or the streets.
Due to crude conditions, he couldn't ensure large volumes entered recipient dogs. So recipient dogs usually survived, meaning transfusions succeeded. Thus, Denis proclaimed himself France's first successful blood transfusion pioneer. Paris medical circles dismissed Denis' experiments, while commoners saw them as circus acts. But one spectator, Montmort, saw potential. Montmort was a science-loving Parisian nobleman. In the 1650s, he founded Montmort Academy, attracting scientists like Dutch astronomer Huygens, discoverer of Saturn's rings, and Titan.
Montmort provided instruments, libraries, scientific salons, and lavish banquets, making the Academy Paris's hottest topic. Even philosopher Descartes visited Montmort's home. So when Louis XIV founded the French Academy, Montmort eagerly expected to lead this royal institution.
However, Louis XIV believed science should serve national strategy and royalty. Only kings could fund such academies.
Montmort's private venture challenged royal authority. Louis not only ignored him, but poached his scientists, including Huygens.
Montmort Academy declined rapidly, but Denis's experiments offered Montmort redemption.
With Montmort's funding, Denis experimented on dogs, sheep, and calves, and planned humanity's first animal-to-human transfusion.
To Denis, animal blood's benefits seemed obvious. Animals were larger with more blood. Crucially, they didn't drink, swear, or indulge in lust, and were less affected by corrupting emotions like sadness or anger. Thus, animal blood was uncontaminated, purer even than in infants. This seems absurd today, but in 17th century Europe, it wasn't unusual. For centuries, Europeans treated diseases with animal blood and meat, like grinding a rooster's organs with sherry to cure tuberculosis. Meanwhile, the British were also exploring the possibility of transfusing animal blood into humans. For example, some suggested that in ancient Roman arenas, gladiators drank beast blood to restore vitality. Similarly, transfusions could transfer life force to cure illnesses. But cautious Britons mostly opposed this. Boyle argued that cross-species transfusion was like hybridizing species. It could create monstrous hybrids. He advised against cross-species experiments, but Denise wasn't cautious. Believing in striking first, he acted immediately. In July 1667, Dennis found a critically ill 16-year-old boy who'd had months of fever and over 20 bloodletting treatments without improvement. Dennis convinced the boy's parents to attempt transfusion. In Christian tradition, lambs were seen as purest animals with cleanest blood. Denise cut a lamb's carotid artery and transfused its blood into the boy's arm. Though trembling, the boy survived, and his condition actually improved. Soon, Dennis paid a bold butcher for a lamb transfusion, succeeding even in a healthy subject. Dennis declared himself humanity's first transfusion pioneer. News reached Britain, stunning its scientific community. Putin pioneered animal transfusion, but due to Boyle's caution, let France claim human trials first. A national humiliation.
Britons dismissed the French as plagiarists while blaming the Philosophical Transactions editor.
Oldenburg had corresponded with French and Dutch doctors, including Denis. Suspected of using invisible ink to leak state secrets, Oldenburg was jailed for treason in the Tower of London, though later exonerated and freed. To redeem British honor, he believed bolder actions were essential. So in November 1667, Oldenburg organized a transfusion experiment on mentally ill patients at the Royal Society, hoping to treat mental illness. According to Royal Society records, a mentally ill patient named Koga showed significant improvement after receiving pure lamb blood, becoming as gentle as a lamb.
Not to be outdone, Dennis also planned human experiments and soon found a madman known throughout Paris.
Antoine Mouroy was a marquise's servant who fell for a noblewoman at her salon. This impossible love drove him mad. During episodes, he'd roam Paris streets naked while ranting. One day in December 1667, Moray encountered Montmore's guards and was taken to Montmore's home. From then on, Denise gave Moray 2 calf blood transfusions.
According to Dennis's reports, both transfusions succeeded spectacularly.
Though Malroy had fever and nausea after transfusion, he recovered fully by next day. Crucially, his madness vanished. Friends confirmed he'd returned to his pre-illness normalcy.
Denise became famous again, spreading news across Europe. Even Philosophical Transactions published his results. Montmore saw hope for reviving his academy.
Thus, Dennis took transfusion to its peak, but soon brought it crashing down. After 2 months of normalcy, Moray relapsed into delirium, fever, and vomiting. In February 1668, Malroy's wife, Brain, sought Denise. She was timid and gullible. Before marriage, Marie's family deceived her that his madness was temporary. She believed them until discovering the truth after wedding. Brain not only accepted this marriage, but bankrupted herself, treating her husband. After Moray's relapse, Brain aggressively demanded Denise transfuse him again immediately. When Dennis arrived, he found this housewife had prepared full surgical tools, even a blood donor calf. How could she afford this? Though Denise found it suspicious, he stayed. According to Dennis, Malroy's constant trembling prevented successful blood transfusion despite the arm incision.
Well, but Moray died the next day. Shocked, Dennis went to examine the body but was driven away by Brain.
Soon after, Brain burned her husband's body. News that transfusion killed Moray spread rapidly through Paris. The Paris medical community, long hostile to Denis, spread this news. Moray's death gave them ammunition, and they likely did more. Denise later learned from Brain that Parisian doctors bribed her to frame him. They likely taught Brain to poison using arsenic. Paris police later found arsenic in Malray's home. Brain admitted poisoning her husband and was imprisoned. Though transfusion didn't cause Malray's death, the court still ruled.
Henceforth, no human transfusion experiments without Paris Medical School approval.
Denis appealed to France's Supreme Court. In November 1669, the court banned transfusion experiments nationwide. Denis left Paris for rural seclusion, abandoning fame-seeking. He never attempted human transfusion again, shifting to other blood research. He later invented a hemostatic agent for mild bleeding still used today. The transfusion ban didn't surprise Denis, the author notes. Conservative Catholic France viewed blood as representing the soul. Transfusing it violated biblical unity of body and spirit. Many Parisian doctors despised transfusion for this reason. Secondly, blood circulation theory underpinned transfusion. Its discoverer, Harvey, was English, France's enemy and heretic, making acceptance impossible. The author believes Louis XIV orchestrated the ban. The court ruling came from him. Louis XIV was a deeply suspicious king, intensely wary of anyone who might threaten his power. After Prime Minister Mazarin's death in 1661, Minister Fouquet was the strongest candidate for succession based on qualifications. But his network of French cultural elites formed the faction that Louis XIV feared. Not only was Fouquet denied the position, he was imprisoned for life on false charges. Both Fouquet and Marmont, who connected with scientific luminaries, were seen as threats by Louis XIV. Louis couldn't recruit Marmont into the French Academy, nor allow him to rise through transfusion research. Transfusion had to be banned to prevent Marmont's resurgence in fraction building. And after Maury's death, Louis XIV's secretary Henri Justel immediately wrote to Royal Society Secretary Oldenburg. The letter stated, "That transfused madman has died, so Denis can no longer boast of his cure. Transfusion is being rejected. No one dares try it on humans anymore." Though Britain didn't ban transfusion, the French scandal cooled scientific enthusiasm there. For 150 years afterward, no transfusion experiments occurred in Europe. Scientists shifted focus to astronomy, physics, and mathematics, slowing medical progress. The transfusion experiment's failure held inherent inevitability. 17th century medicine was embryonic. Though blood circulation was understood, knowledge of sterilization and blood types was absent. Experiments groped blindly in a long, dark journey. Short-term breakthroughs were impossible. 150 years later, in 1818, Englishman James Blundell successfully transfused a hemorrhaging mother to save her life. By the 20th century, sterilization and blood type awareness finally made transfusion a safe medical practice. That concludes our interpretation of the blood transfusion story. The reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow.